single stack of genealogical records. We're talking birth, death, marriage certificates for just one person, Brian Ronald Smith.
And our mission really is to see if we can piece together the story of a major life change, a huge geographical move, and what looks like a family split, using only the locations listed in these records.
Exactly. These documents, they might seem a bit dry at first, just names and dates. But if you treat them like data points, they're like time capsules. They don't tell you why something happened, but they tell you exactly where.
We're calling this one the split line. And what immediately jumps out from this file is this huge geographical contradiction.
It's massive, isn't it?
Yeah. The Smith family, they started out deeply, deeply rooted on the Yorkshire coast in Bridlington. But Brian and his father, they ended up way over on the West Coast in Barrow-in-Furness.
And you have to think about that distance. I mean, that's well over 150 miles. You're crossing the entire spine of England.
It's a fundamental change to the family's identity.
It is. When you see a shift like that, from the established East Coast to the industrial Northwest, it just screams that something big happened. It could be work, it could be the war, or maybe just needing a complete fresh start.
So we're basically using the cold, hard facts of location
to find the warm, messy human story underneath.
Okay, so before we get to that big pivot, we need to really establish just how solid those East Coast foundations were. What was Brian actually leaving behind?
Let's start at the beginning then. Brian Ronald Smith. He was born on May 10th, 1937, and the location is listed very clearly as Bridlington, Yorkshire.
And his parents weren't just passing through.
Oh, not at all. They were absolute East Coast fixtures. His father, George Smith, born in 1909, was a Bridlington man himself. And his mother, Constance May Hughes, born in 1913, was from just up the coast in a little place called Ulrum. So their whole world was in this very small, very familiar part of Yorkshire.
And if you go back another generation, the roots just get deeper, don't they? It gives you a sense of just how profound this move must have been for them.
It really does. George's father, James William Smith, was born just inland in Driffield. His mother, Lily Lawson, was born right on Bridlington Quay.
So this family wasn't just in Yorkshire. They were part of the landscape. The fishing, the sea, the local markets, that was their world.
And the mother's side, Constance's side, is even more interesting in a way. The records keep referring to the Noddle tree.
I saw that. What does that tell us?
Well, it highlights the maternal line. Constance's father, Henry Hughes, was actually born way down in Shropshire, which is a bit of an outlier. But he clearly moved to Yorkshire, married a local woman, and died in Bridlington in '71. But that Noddle name, that comes from Brian's great-grandmother, Amelia Noddle, born in Kilham, Yorkshire in 1865. That seems to have been the real genealogical anchor for them.
It's so interesting that the records themselves call it out, the Noddle tree. It sort of suggests that in the family's own story, that line was really important.
A deep link back to the rural heart of East Yorkshire, an identity built over centuries, all in that one small area.
So to sum up, Brian Smith, born in 1937, inherits this incredibly rich, settled, localized history. Everything he knew, everything his parents knew, pointed east to the North Sea.
The family story is practically written in the salt air of Bridlington. And now we have to look at the fracture.
Right. Let's unpack this. We've set the scene in Yorkshire. Now we look at the final data points, the death certificates for Brian's parents, George and Constance. And this is where the picture of a family split really comes into focus.
This is the turning point. We don't have a diary entry telling us what happened, but we have the final, undeniable result. Constance May Hughes, the mother. She died in August 1991.
And her death location?
Bridlington, Yorkshire. She stayed. She remained in the ancestral home, the place where her whole world was built.
But George Smith, the father, he died much earlier, in April 1977.
14 years earlier. And he died in Barrow-in-Furness, Cumbria.
The complete opposite side of the country.
And this is the critical part. Brian, who was born in Bridlington, he followed his father's new path. He died decades later, in January 2013, also in Barrow-in-Furness.
So this split must have happened pretty early in Brian's life, maybe late 40s, early 50s.
That would be the logical assumption, yes. A decision was made that sent George and his son Brian west, while Constance stayed east.
And you couldn't pick two more different towns. Bridlington is a seaside resort, fishing, tourism. Barrow, especially back then, was a powerhouse of heavy industry.
Shipbuilding, steel. It would have been a magnet for work, especially post-war. The most likely driver here is economic. George saw an opportunity, or maybe felt a necessity, that was strong enough to pull him and his son clear across the country.
So you're left with this family history that's literally split by the geography of Britain.
It is. George and Brian built a new legacy in Cumbria, while Constance lived out her days in Yorkshire. The simple fact they died 150 miles apart speaks volumes about separate lives.
And the records make it very clear, don't they? Brian didn't just go there for a temporary job.
Not at all. He left Yorkshire and he never went back. That move became the permanent reality for the male line of the family. The Barrow chapter started, and Brian put down roots almost immediately.
You see that commitment right away in his adult life. The entire chart from that point on is centered around Cumbria and North Lancashire.
Yes, exactly. His first big milestone there is his marriage to Evelyn May High in September of 1960, and the location is Barrow-in-Furness.
So he's a young man, he's established, and he's marrying into the local community.
And she was a local. Evelyn was born right there in Barrow in 1940. So he's not just working there, he's building a social life. He's integrating.
But this is where the story, it just turns tragic. The records show just how much difficulty Brian faced while he was trying to build this new life.
The timeline is, well, it's heartbreakingly short.
They married in September 1960. Their daughter, Julie, was born just a few months later, February 2nd, 1961, in Barrow.
And then, not even 2 weeks later, on February 14th, Evelyn died.
She was just 20 years old.
20 years old. Imagine that. You move far from your mother, you're trying to build a new life, you get married, you have a child, and then you lose your wife all before you're even 24.
It's an incredible amount of emotional weight. It really speaks to his resilience that he was able to cope and stay to continue establishing himself there.
It really does. You have to think, the need for community, for support in Barrow must have been overwhelming at that point. He's got a newborn baby, he's geographically cut off from his mother and the rest of his family back in York.
And the records show he didn't waste any time trying to solidify those roots in the West.
No, he didn't. He persevered. And within 2 years, he marries again. He finds a connection with Joyce V. Snaith in January 1963.
And the ceremony was just next door, in Ulverston.
Which is basically part of the same Barrow industrial area, yes.
Yeah.
And Joyce was also a true local, born in Ulverston in 1940. This second marriage, it completely cements Brian's commitment to the region.
Right. He's not a temporary worker anymore. He's the founder of a new Smith dynasty on the West Coast.
Absolutely. And they go on to have 3 more children, which officially completes that transfer of the Smith surname from Bridlington to Barrow.
So let's look at that next generation, the children of Brian and Joyce. We have David Brian Smith, born in 63.
Then Paul Ronald Smith in 1968, and Diane Smith in 1971.
And all of them, without exception.
All born in Barrow-in-Furness, Cumbria. The move is complete. The Smiths are now a Cumbrian family. We're literally watching the birth of a new regional identity.
And what's so fascinating is how the descendants then continue to anchor themselves in that same small area. This isn't a family that moves around a lot.
No, they are just as rooted in Barrow and Ulverston as their ancestors ever were in Bridlington and Killam.
We see Brian's first daughter, Julie. She marries Stephen Paul Bolton in Ulverston in 1987.
And his younger daughter, Diane, marries David J. Cole, also in Ulverston, in the year 2000. Barrow and Ulverston have become the new ancestral territory.
The pattern is just undeniable, isn't it?
It is, and it continues. You look at Julie's daughters, Cheryl and Michaela, born in Ulverston and Barrow. Michaela's marriage is to another local from Barrow. The family is just thoroughly embedded in that Cumbrian community now.
And finally, the youngest branch we have here, the children of Diane Smith and David Cole.
Ethan, Demi, Aaron, and Ebony, all born in Barrow-in-Furness in the early 2000s.
So the descendant of the Noddle tree, who started his life looking out at the North Sea,
is now the patriarch of a multi-generational family rooted firmly on the coast of the Irish Sea.
It really shows the power of this kind of data, doesn't it? We started with a contradiction, East versus West.
And we end with a pretty profound conclusion. Brian's life was defined by that split, and it resulted in a complete transfer of the family's identity. The Yorkshire chapter closed, really defined by Constance's choice to stay.
And the Cumbrian chapter began, defined by George's decision to move and then by Brian's own resilience and commitment.
So when you step back and look at the whole thing, what's really fascinating is how those two simple, quiet facts, George and Brian dying in Barrow, Constance dying in Bridlington, how they just speak volumes.
Yeah.
That distance between the parents is the most eloquent piece of information in the entire file.
Okay.
It's a historical fault line that permanently changed the family's future. A choice made decades earlier, likely for work, created 2 completely distinct halves of a single family story.
And that brings us to our final thought for you to mull over. When we look at a family history, sometimes the places we leave tell just as much of a story as the places we arrive.
A story of sacrifice, of ambition.
Exactly. What profound, unwritten story of sheer grit is contained in that decision George Smith made? To pull his young son away from a deep ancestral home and completely redefine the lives of all his descendants, all on the other side of the country, what kind of opportunity was strong enough to make that split worthwhile?